Hi, this is John Boyne. I'm the author of the novel The House of Special Purpose, and this is a section from a chapter in that novel called The Prince of Mogilev. For weeks after I arrived in St Petersburg, I found my thoughts drifting back to Kashin, to the family I had left behind, and the friend whose death weighed heavy on my conscience. At nights, lying on my thin bunk, Kolek's face appeared before me, his eyes bulging from his head, his throat bruised and scarred from the ropes. I imagined his terror as the guards led him towards the trees where the noose had been hung. For all his bravado, I could not imagine that he went to his death with anything other than fear in his heart and regret for the decades not lived. I prayed that he did not blame me too much. Regardless, it could scarcely compare with how much I blamed myself. And when I was not thinking of Kolek, it was my family who dominated my thoughts, particularly my sister Asha, who would have given anything to be living where I was now. Indeed, it was Asha who I was thinking of late one afternoon when I first encountered the great reading room of the Winter Palace. The doors were opened and I turned, intending to leave, but an instinct made me change my mind and I stepped inside, where I found myself alone in the serenity of a library for the first time in my life. 3 walls were filled from floor to ceiling with books, and a ladder was attached to each rail so that the browser could push himself across the floor. In the center stood a heavy oak table on which were placed 2 large volumes, open to a series of maps. Great leather armchairs were situated at different points in the room, and I imagined myself sitting there for an afternoon, lost in reading. I had never read a book in my entire life, of course, but they called to me, a whisper from the constant bindings, and I reached for one after the other, scanning the title pages, reading opening paragraphs as well as I could, placing my discarded volumes on the table behind me without a thought. So lost was I in my examination that I failed to hear the door open behind me, and only as the heavy boots marched across the floor did I blink back into the moment and realize that I was not alone. I turned, throwing the book that I was holding in the air in surprise. It fell to the floor, crashing open at my feet, the noise echoing across the walls, while I dropped to my knees and bowed my head in the presence of the Anointed One. "Your Majesty," I said, not daring to look up. "Your Majesty, I must offer my sincere apologies. I was lost, you see, and—" "Stand up, Georgy Jachmenev," said the Tsar, and I stood slowly. Not long before, I had been grieving for my family. Now I was in dread of being sent back to them. "Look at me." I lifted my head and our eyes met. I could feel my cheeks begin to redden, but he looked neither angry nor displeased. "What are you doing here anyway?" he asked me. "I lost my way," I said. "I hadn't intended coming in here, but when I saw them—" "The books?" "Yes, sir. I was interested, that's all. I wanted to see what they contained." He breathed heavily for a moment, as if deciding how best to deal with this situation, before sighing and stepping away from me, walking behind the oak table and looking down at the volumes of maps, turning their pages and not looking at me as he spoke. "I would not have taken you for a reader," he said quietly. "I'm not, sir," I explained. "That is, I never have been." "But you can read?" "Yes, sir." "Who taught you? Your father?" I shook my head. "No, sir. My father would not have known how. It was my sister Asha. She had some books she had bought from a stall. She taught me my letters. Well, most of them anyway." "I see," he said. "And who taught her?" I thought about it, but was forced to admit that I did not know. Perhaps, in her desire to escape our home village, she had simply educated herself, in order that she could, for the length of a story's few pages, escape to brighter worlds. "But you liked it?" asked the Tsar. "I mean to say, something drew you in here." I looked around the room and thought for a moment before offering an honest answer. "There's something interesting." "Yes, sir," I said. "My sister would tell me stories. I enjoyed hearing them. I thought I might find some here that would recall her to me." "I expect you're starting to miss your family," said the Tsar, stepping back now towards the window so that the soft light shining through illuminated him on all sides. "I know that I miss my own when I am away from them for any length of time." "I haven't had any time to think of them, sir," I replied. "I've been trying to work as hard as I might, with Count Charnetsky, I mean, and the rest of the time I am honoured to spend with the Tsarevich." He smiled when I mentioned his son and nodded his head. "Yes, indeed," he said. "And you were getting along well, the two of you?" "Yes, sir," I replied, "very well." "He seems to like you. I've asked him about you." "I'm gratified to hear it, sir." He nodded and looked away, his attention drawn back to the maps for a moment, and he marched towards them, stroking his beard as he looked down. "These drawings," he muttered. "It's all in these drawings. Do you realise that, Georgy Jachmenev? The land, the borders, the ports, how to win. If only I could see it, but I can't see it," he hissed, more to himself than to me. I decided that I should leave him to his studies, so I stepped back, never turning my back on him as I made for the door. "Perhaps we should get you some lessons," he said loudly before I could take my leave. "Lessons, sir?" "Improve your reading. The books are to be read. I tell all the staff that they may read as they will, providing they take care of the volumes and return them in the condition that they found them. Would you like that, Georgy Jachmenev?" I couldn't think for a moment whether I would or wouldn't, but didn't like to disappoint him, so gave the answer that I believed he desired. "Yes, Your Majesty," I said. "I'd like that very much." "Well, I'll see that the Count sends you to some of the classes attended by the boys in the Corps of Pages. If you are to spend so much time with Alexei, it's only right that you should be educated." "You may leave now," he said, dismissing me. I turned and left the room, closing the door behind me, little knowing that a lifetime surrounded by books was initiated by that one conversation with the Tsar.